You can't live here. Not hello, not welcome to the neighborhood, just that. She said it like she was reading a line from a rule book written in stone. I was still standing in the open back of the moving truck, one foot on the metal ramp, holding a box labeled Kitchen, Fragile, when I heard her voice cut through the cicadas. At first, I thought she was joking. People joke when they're nervous, when they don't know what to say. But when I turned, she was already halfway across my gravel drive, heels sinking into the dust, phone in her hand like it was a badge. "You can't live here," she repeated, louder, for witnesses. I had just bought the place, signed, paid, inspected, insured. The deed was in my glove compartment. But in that moment, none of that seemed to matter. I moved out there because I wanted quiet, not the curated quiet of gated communities and trimmed hedges and people peeking through blinds. Real quiet, wind in the trees quiet, crickets, distant owls, long stretches of nothing. The house sat on 2 acres of scrubby pines and tall grass, just outside the edge of a development that had grown like ivy over what used to be farmland. Their neighborhood had a name on a stone sign, a fountain that never quite worked, and an HOA that sent monthly newsletters about mailbox paint and acceptable shades of mulch. My house wasn't part of that, never had been. It was older, a little crooked, but solid and mine. My routine, even before I fully moved in, was simple. Coffee on the back steps at dawn, fix whatever the inspection report had politely called cosmetic, evenings with the windows open, letting the sounds of the woods in. No TV most nights, just the low hum of the fridge and the frogs waking up. I liked it that way. I needed it that way. After a long, loud life in places where everyone wanted something from me, I wanted to disappear into something small and steady. I didn't want trouble. She introduced herself after that first line, name first, last, and title, president of the HOA. She stood with her hands on her hips, surveying my property like a manager inspecting a messy stockroom. "You can't live here because this property is adjacent to our development and we have very strict community standards." I said, calmly, "This property isn't part of your HOA." She smiled like I'd just said something adorable and wrong. "We'll see about that." That was the first warning sign. Not anger, not shouting, certainty. At first, it was small things. A letter in my mailbox addressed to resident, explaining community guidelines for exterior maintenance. Another letter about noise restrictions. Then one about trash bins being visible from the road. I ignored them. Then came the visits. A man with a clipboard who said he was doing a compliance check. A woman who took photos of my fence and said she'd report it. I kept answering politely, kept explaining the same thing. "I'm not part of your HOA." They nod, smile, and keep writing. One afternoon, I came home to find a bright orange sticker slapped across my front door. Notice of violation, failure to comply. It listed fines, deadlines, threats of legal action. I stood there with my groceries melting in my arms, staring at my own door like it had betrayed me. That night, I pulled out my paperwork. Deed, survey, closing documents, all clear. No HOA, no covenants, no shared assessments, nothing. This wasn't confusion. This was pressure, intentional. And that's when I realized she wasn't mistaken about where I lived. She just didn't care. The fines started showing up as bills, then as late notices, then as something that looked suspiciously like a collection letter. I went to the county office. They confirmed it again, in writing, not in the HOA. I mailed copies to the HOA address listed on the letters, certified. They sent back another violation notice, this time for hostile behavior toward community representatives. I laughed when I read that, a short, surprised laugh that turned into something bitter. She escalated in ways that were clever and ugly. She told neighbors I was running an illegal rental, that I had unknown people coming and going. She told the local Facebook group I was dumping trash on HOA land. I started noticing cars slowing down when they passed my driveway, people watching, whispers that stopped when I walked by. I tried to stay out of it, tried to keep my head down, but when you live alone and suddenly feel like the whole area has decided you're a problem, it gets under your skin. It makes you question your own footprint, your own right to exist quietly. I went to one HOA meeting, just once, sat in the back, waited my turn, and calmly explained that they had no jurisdiction over my property. She didn't even look at me when she responded, just said, "Our legal counsel disagrees," then moved on to the next agenda item. People glanced at me like I'd interrupted a funeral. Then came the city. A zoning inspector showed up one morning, responding to multiple complaints. About what? Noise? Unpermitted structures? Environmental violations? He walked the property, checked his list, and quietly told me, "None of this checks out." But the visits kept coming. Different departments, same vague accusations. Someone was pulling strings. Here's the thing about me. I look quiet, unassuming, like someone who avoids conflict, and that's mostly true. But I also grew up with a mother who documented everything because she didn't trust anyone to play fair. And I worked for years in compliance and data auditing, where you learn that most bullies rely on two things: fear and people not checking the paperwork. So I started checking. I pulled public records, HOA filings, financial statements, property maps. I noticed inconsistencies, fees collected from properties that weren't members, contracts awarded to companies owned by board members' relatives, zoning complaints traced back to the same IP address, hers. Meanwhile, things got worse. One morning, I woke up to find my water shut off. No city notice, no repair trucks, just off. I called the utility company. They said someone had called in a line damage emergency from my address and requested a shutoff. It wasn't me. I filed a police report. Nothing came of it. Then the lien notice arrived, not from the city, from the HOA, claiming unpaid dues and fines on a property they had no legal claim to. My hands shook when I read it, because even a fake lien can mess with your life if you don't respond fast enough. That was the moment I stopped trying to reason with them and started planning. I installed cameras, not flashy ones, small, hidden. I started recording interactions, saving letters, tracking dates. And I found an ally in a place I didn't expect, an older man down the road who'd lived there long before the development showed up. He told me, quietly, that she'd done this before, pressured people, claimed land, bullied small property owners until they sold, cheap, to friends or relatives. Then came the moment that almost broke me, a court notice. They were suing for enforcement of HOA rules, even though they had no authority, even though they knew it. Legal defense isn't cheap, and for a few nights I sat on my back steps listening to the frogs, wondering if the quiet I loved was about to cost me everything. It felt like she was winning. She probably thought she already had. What she didn't know was that I had sent a very thick folder to the state's attorney general's office. Financial irregularities, harassment, fraudulent claims of authority. And I kept going to court, letting her think the lawsuit was working, letting her think I was scrambling. At the mediation hearing, she finally spoke directly to me, smiled, said, "You could avoid all this if you just joined the HOA and paid what you owe." On record, in front of witnesses, claiming authority she didn't have. Her lawyer shifted in his seat. I said nothing. 2 weeks later, investigators showed up at the HOA office, then at her house, then at the bank. Turns out she'd been collecting fees from non-member properties for years, funneling money into shell companies, using the HOA as a personal development fund, and threatening people who questioned it. The lawsuit against me was dropped. Then the county filed charges: fraud, misrepresentation, harassment. She resigned from the board the same day the news hit the local paper, but resignation didn't stop the case. I saw her one last time, not yelling, not confident, just tired, standing on her driveway while officers loaded boxes into the trunk of a police car. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet again.